Well, welcome. I'm glad to have you here as we start this new series on getting started with TypeScript. My name is Dan Wallin, and I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft and a big fan of the TypeScript language. I've been using it since it came out and pretty much use it in every project where I can because you'll see it's a pretty phenomenal language to get started with. So in this series, we're going to walk you through the core fundamentals you need to know. It's not going to be everything, but it'll be just enough to get you started. And in this first video, I'm going to give you a really quick run through of 5 things that I think are important to know when you consider if you should learn TypeScript. So the first item I want to highlight is that TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. So if you already know JavaScript, you're going to be well on your way to understanding what you can do with TypeScript. Now, if you've written ES5 code, I call that the prehistoric JavaScript because it's pretty old at this point, that will work with TypeScript. More modern JavaScript, starting with ES 2015, which is probably the biggest change to the language ever, those features work in TypeScript. And then, of course, every year now, we get new features rolled out, and all of that rolls up into being supported by TypeScript. So TypeScript, we say, is a superset of JavaScript. That means if you're already building JavaScript apps, the move to TypeScript is not nearly as big as you might think. Sure, there's things you need to learn. Sure, there's gotchas here and there, but is it worth it? Well, I wouldn't be making this video otherwise if I didn't think it was. So it's a superset. Now, the way it works is you're going to write TypeScript files. They have a TS extension, as you'll see here. You'll then run those through a TSC TypeScript compiler that will then emit or generate JavaScript files. And you can even tell it what to generate. If you wanted to target the old ES5 JavaScript that works in the really old browsers for some reason, you could. If you want to target the latest version that's released of JavaScript, ES20, whatever it is, you could target that as well. And I'll show you that coming up in a moment. Number 2, TypeScript adds guardrails to your code. Now, what do I mean by guardrails? Well, I live in Arizona in the United States. And you can think of TypeScript like the guardrails you see on the road. And the reason I mention Arizona is we have a lot of canyons here. A lot of people hear the Grand Canyon. You might have even been there. But we have a lot more than that. For example, when I drive to where I grew up, we have a canyon called the Salt River Canyon. And it has guardrails everywhere you go because if you go off, it's a long ways down. And you definitely don't want to drive off the road. Now, I never planned to, but also in code, I never planned to have bugs. I don't plan to go down the wrong road, but it'd be kind of nice if I could get some pushback if I'm not doing something right. That's what TypeScript can do. Now let me show you an example of that. I'm going to jump on over to the TypeScript Playground, and you can go to typescriptlang.org and then click on Playground up at the top. And you'll notice that I have a function here called add. Really simple JavaScript function, takes an X and a Y, adds those two together, and then we're going to call it, but you'll notice that I might have a typo here. I have 5 and 7. Now, in a lot of languages, that would just not compile. It would not work. But in JavaScript, it will totally work. We get 57. It massages the data. JavaScript says, I can work with this, and it takes the number 5, and it just kind of slams it together with the number 7 because it's a string. Well, what we can do is add some guardrails so that we don't have these types of problems. This one's pretty obvious. I mean, it's only 6 lines of code total. But I could come in and say I'd like this to be a number and I'd like this to be a number. And now notice what happens here. All right, we get an error. Argument of type string is not assignable to the number y up here. So of course, I'd have to come on in, I'd have to fix that. And now if we run it, you'll notice we get the expected result of 12. Which is good. Now, although this is a very simple example, this is where TypeScript starts. You can add in data types that can help you so that as your code does get bigger and as you're working with a whole team, you can catch these issues right up front way before you ever ship your code. And that's super powerful, you'll see. All right, so let's move on to the next item. So number 3, TypeScript enhances your productivity. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, TypeScript, as you saw, can help with guardrails, but also as I'm typing in different editors, whether you use Visual Studio, VS Code, WebStorm, PHP Storm, others out there, most of them have very good support for TypeScript these days. So if I type add, notice right off the bat, I get some IntelliSense, some code help that is going to tell me what I'm allowed to pass. Now, in the JavaScript world, you'll get the parameters, but oftentimes without looking at the docs or the raw source code, you're not sure what to pass. And this gets more powerful as your code gets more complex. So now, obviously, if I pass like some Booleans, let's do true and true, it automatically goes red, says, Boolean's not assignable to number. We'll put back what we had. Then it tells me this one's wrong. And this is the productivity through the guardrails and the code help that you'll get. And it makes it really, really nice to work with. Now, I could also come in and do a JavaScript class. Some people like these, some people don't like these. That's okay. But let's just do a customer here really quickly. And I'm going to add a first name of Dan and last name of Wallin. Now, let's say I wanted to use this class. We could come on in and say customer equals new customer. And now as I type customer dot, you'll notice I get really nice code help. So these are some of the productivity features you'll see. There's way more than this, but this will help get you started. Let's move on to the next item. So number 4, TypeScript lets you use modern features today. There's a lot of features that come out in JavaScript that if your user doesn't support that feature in their browser yet, you just can't use it. And how fun is that as a developer to sit there and go, oh, look at this awesome feature, but I can't take advantage of it because I can't force the browser to use this version of the browser. Now, it's a little better these days, I'm going to argue, because browsers can auto-update, but not all enterprises do that. A lot of times it's pushed out. So with TypeScript, what they will do where possible is reverse engineer your code. Now I'm going to show you kind of an older example of this. We made this class here. Let's take this out. And if I go back to the JavaScript that's generated, notice that it just shows the class. So nothing special here because my target is a more modern browser. Now if I go up to tsconfig, you'll notice I'm targeting ES 2017, which is kind of the default these days. But I'm going to go all the way back to ES5, or I could even do ES3, but let's do ES5. I'm going to close this. Now look how the code over here on the right changed. TypeScript reverse engineered the code to make it so it would still work in older browsers. That's pretty cool because I've been using things like classes where appropriate with libraries or frameworks I was using for many years, way before browsers actually supported classes. And there's other features that we could get into as well that TypeScript will help out with. So what's so nice about this is you can now leverage these more modern features sooner than later, as long as TypeScript supports it. And of course, you can always go into the TypeScript docs to see what's supported. So let's move to our final item, and that is TypeScript works where you work every day. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're writing vanilla JavaScript code, but you want to use TypeScript for the guardrails, for the code productivity, for the team benefits, lots of benefits, then you can run npm install TypeScript. And in a later video, I'm going to show you this in action actually. And then add a configuration file for TypeScript and be ready to go. You could make it where it'd be taking your TypeScript and then converting that into just vanilla JavaScript. Totally works fine if that's the road you're using at work. Now, if you're building React, TypeScript's built in. You could do npx create React app, give your app a name, and then say --template TypeScript. And that will automatically add everything you need to get started with TypeScript. And then there's other React options out there that will do the same thing. Angular uses TypeScript out of the box. You actually don't have a choice. So if you do ng new my app, whatever your app is named, you're automatically going to have TypeScript code kind of spit out. It'll scaffold that code so that you can get started very quickly and easily. Vue has an option for TypeScript. If you do Vue create, whatever your app is, there's going to be an option for features. You just simply use the arrow key to go down. You then hit TypeScript, and you're good to go. And now you'd have TypeScript built in. And then, of course, some of the tools you might use for Microsoft 365 development, Teams development, for example. VS Code has an extension called the Teams extension, and Teams Toolkit, I should say. And you could also use one called YoTeams. and they both support using TypeScript. So there's a lot of good reasons to learn TypeScript because it's going to be supported where you work every day. Now, until the next video, this is where you can go to get some more information. This is where I went for the playground. It's called typescriptlang.org, and they'll give you some more information on getting started. I would recommend go to the playground. They'll have some examples up top in a drop-down. You can start exploring. It's an amazing language once you learn what it's capable of. So please like and subscribe so that you can be notified of other videos in this series, and stay tuned. I have some more coming right around the corner. Thanks for joining me today.